All right, we will call this meeting to order. Do a quick sound check. Can everybody hear me all the way in the back and in the front? Can everybody hear me real well? All right, I'm seeing no wagging nose, so if you have any issues, go talk to that guy over there. Can the commission hear me? Can we hear up here? All right. It's our first meeting in this new setup, and thank you, Commissioner McGurk, for suggesting this. I think it's really well done. I feel nice and safe. I have my mask, but I feel like I'm far enough away from everybody that I'm gonna go the easy route and not wear it for this part of the meeting. So with that, we'll call this workshop on homelessness to order. And Kelly, if you would just call the roll, please.
Mayor Owen.
Here.
Vice Mayor Clody.
Yes.
Commissioner Hartman.
Here.
Commissioner McGurk.
Here.
Commissioner Sachs.
And here.
Thank you.
Okay, so first item up is public participation. We want to hear from our police chief. We got some attorneys lined up. We got some folks from First Step Shelter here. I know we all want to hear from them, but we want to hear from the public first. So if you have public comments, if you'll step right up to this mic, and if you give us your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. There's a timer just off to your left, and if you see me doing this, that means you're over time. So come on up if you'd like to speak. We've got one coming forward. If you want to go after him, just head on down when he's finished up.
Hi, good evening. And yes, I forgot my mask too. But thank you very much for having this meeting. We're here to discuss a topic that's very timely and very important to the Canal Street community, as well as our local community. And really, as one of the merchants on Canal Street, I want to say we need help, and there needs to be a safe, humane way to approach the issue of homelessness. I mean, we could do a knee-jerk reaction. First thing we have to do, if we just get rid of the park benches, the problem will go away. That's not a good solution, because lots of people that visit the stores, one of their spouses or themselves may like to sit down and enjoy our community. So that is not an option, but we do need a safe place for homeless people to go so they're not congregating in front of the stores. The merchants have worked really, really hard over the past 10 years to turn that into it's an attraction, it's a business investment. I mean, the local merchants have worked really, really hard, and also the local residents who have begun investing in downtown and living there, and we really would like the city to come up with some kind of equitable solution.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Others? Yes, ma'am. Come on down.
Hello, Mayor, Commissioners, Chief of Police. My name is Melinda Wilk, 2100 North Peninsula, North Beach. Been a resident 20 years, and I am in the healthcare field. There is a Ministry of Resources, and it is a guide to naming the resources. It is out of a church in Edgewater, Florida. I will get you a copy. I didn't bring it today, and my husband updates it regularly. And it's not a phone call to make to get information. The website lists everything: housing, shelter, food, da-da-da. I did review the PowerPoint, and while good, I didn't learn anything new from it after being here 20 years. There's an increase in local crime, burglary, theft of fishing rods, et cetera, et cetera. But what is on the top of my mind is the recent announcement by the Florida Department of Health, Volusia County, and once again, Southeast Volusia, Oak Hill, Edgewater, New Smyrna, we're getting the raw end of this proposal to do anything, testing. The Department of Health on West Canal closed for whatever services they provided. I did work there for a time. And, there's no dental care available to this region. Department of Health offered the testing for corona, which is a new public awareness. And where did they announce on Channel 13? We're going to be in Daytona, Orange City, and I think it was Daytona, Orange City, and Deltona. Again, this side of the county. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Oops, excuse me.
Sorry.
I just,
Please
as a
give
member
your-
of the faith community and have been
Give
living.
your name and address if you would, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. 1816 Enterprise Avenue, and my name is Carolyn Martin.
Okay.
As a member of the faith community, and I've been a member of the New Smyrna, living in New Smyrna about 11 years now, we've looked at this problem of homelessness from many different issues. I was opposed to the shelter that was going into Daytona to solve a homeless situation in New Smyrna, Edgewater, and Oak Hill. Because this community is here because it represents, it lives here. The community of homeless people live here. They consider themselves residents of our cities. So I don't believe you can solve a problem by shipping your problem away. I would like to propose that a possible residence home for the unhoused in the old Kmart building be considered. Parking separately in the back for staff and residents. Rear entry would serve, and it would not interfere with the businesses. It could be used for ancillary services because it would be close to shopping and the library and the post office, Stuart Marchman, Florida Hospital. Churches in the area could serve as staff because many are already vetted out, and they do ministry work. That's why they're vetted out. Also, if we polled the community, I think we could get their support and find out how many would take advantage of a possible interim residence situation if we used a facility like the old Kmart building. And it includes them in the city, and it would put them in a place where they could probably gain a job or get some much needed health care and have access to inbound services and some exterior services as well. There's a bike shop nearby, car repair, other things. We as a community have been looking at trying to put money together for a small piece of ground to have tiny homes for the homeless population, because a lot of them are very insecure about being bound up in some large facility, and there is the chronic homeless population which will never be work and be housed because it's not their nature. And I could go into a lot of the psychological reasons why, but it is not their nature. So with that said, we have to consider the
Thank you,
animal
ma'am.
itself we're
That's your-
dealing with.
That's your time.
But I would like to leave this with you.
You can leave it with the clerk right over there.
Okay. Thank you
She'll
so
pass it out to us.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, how's everybody?
Good, how are you?
Good. My name is Audrey Bellini. I live at 146 Julia Street in New Smyrna Beach. I live in the Tabby Houses, which is right across the street from City Hall. I was kind of hoping that we'd have a better turnout with our residents at our community, but again, I assumed that it was over at City Hall, but that's okay. So this issue, I know they're unfortunate, but right now, I mean, with everything going on, I think that it has worsened. I think that at this point, they're a little more aggressive. They're starting to ask for money. They're starting to ask for food. About 7:30 every morning, I can sit on my deck and I can see probably 5 or 10 bicycles just shooting from the old library at Old Fort Park, just going right to the west side, because I know that they all house there at night. And I like the idea of the Kmart building. I mean, that is a great idea. But at this point, I mean, I think that something has to be done. It's not safe for us to walk around. It's uncomfortable. You know, it's just kind of scary. But I speak on behalf of the Tabby House. I'm the president, and everybody contacts me constantly about the issue. So I'm just hoping that somebody else would have showed up. I know we have a couple here, but I thank you, and anything that you can do to help us, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have, just for the commission's benefit, we do have someone at City Hall directing folks here still, all the way through our 6:30 meeting, I believe. So, yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, City Leaders. My name is Rachel Allen. I reside at 119 Faulkner Street. I'm also part of the Tabby House community. I'm a business owner and a landlord. In addition to that, I've been at that address since 2017. I was raised in Volusia County, and I've owned property here in New Smyrna for 13 years. I have been a permanent resident since 2013, so this is my home. And I'm speaking to you tonight of, obviously, the concern with the homeless population. Over the last 3 years, I personally had multiple issues with homeless. I've had someone coming into my private pool area, using my pool and outdoor shower to clean themselves, which was caught on my camera. I've had them stealing plants, flags, decorations from my residents. I've had them come into both my businesses and beg for money and food. I've had a run-in with someone in the homeless who didn't have their dog on a leash, which their dog attacked my dog. I have been aggressively approached and asked for money, food, and drugs by a homeless man in Riverside Park right here. There was a woman who was trespassing onto my property, and then she made her way to my neighbor's property. This was just recently, hid in the courtyard area, and she wound up having to be coerced out by law enforcement and the fire department. So lots of things going on. There's many more. What I'm going to say about this is definitely a problem, and we obviously need a solution. This is just me, one person, one business, referencing all of these different things. So I come to you tonight as a resident, a business owner, and a taxpayer, and tell you that these are some of my fears living in the community. With minimal safety protection on these issues, therefore I'm asking for your help. I feel it's imperative that the City of New Smyrna Beach develop and pass some type of a city ordinance that will give the opportunity to address these, that will give the community an opportunity, law enforcement, to address these issues properly when they arise. I would like to see us adopt some type of an ordinance like Daytona has and many other cities that have the same problems that we are having. It's imperative that this city gets a handle on this. I feel it's incredibly unfair as a taxpayer, business owner, and a resident that I have to live in fear in my city. This is not the first time this problem has arose, and there are many solutions and adequate solutions, and I would like to see New Smyrna take action on this. I support all of you as leaders in my city, and I'm asking that you support me and my concerns as a resident, taxpayer, and business owner. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Others wish to speak? I feel like you're wanting to go, aren't you? All right, you're next, right after Randy. Go ahead, Randy. She looks around every time, so go ahead.
Randy Herman, 108 Esther Street. I would like to speak to the issue of mental health. I am a licensed clinical mental health social work provider and have a small practice here in New Smyrna for quite a few years. I also have my office at the UCC Church, where a fair number of homeless have congregated and come, one, because they do AA meetings and a variety of other services. But one of our problems is that the Stuart Marshman service closed down here, and the neighborhood council has tried successively to get them to come back. They have budget problems, but they were servicing a large population here in our community, and when they closed their clinic here, they offer no services in our area, so that means anyone who needs services has to go to Daytona, and that's a big problem for many of our homeless. So I think mental health has to be a part of the solution. Up to 38 to maybe 40% of homeless are suffering from mental illness or some sort of mental health issue. The other thing I would add is signs are kind of an interesting phenomena, and if you've gone down Saxon Boulevard lately, they cleared out a bit of land, quite a bit of land, on the east side of Saxon and put up very large no trespassing signs. Probably the ugliest, most unwelcoming signs I've ever seen. And I think it's somewhat ironic that it was probably cleared because a few homeless were camping out there. And on the right, we have very beautiful homes being built into the Calalisa Creek wetlands area. It seems like a very ironic sort of situation where on one side of the street we welcome certain groups of people, and the other side we don't. So I think it's a challenge. I think many of the homeless do see this as their home, and we need to make sure we can provide safe places for all people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, City Commissioners and Police Chief. You all, I think, know me. My name is Donna Hinkle, and I chair the Community Hot Meal Program at First United Methodist Church. And I also run the feeding program out of the Shriners Club at 1111 South Orange. My home address is 1115 South Orange, which is 2 houses down from the Shriners Club where I serve. My passion is to help anybody that needs help, but I agree with you guys. We do have an issue. Police Chief, I back you 150%, and your officers, because you've all pulled us out of a lot of issues. The victim advocate, Donna, and her co-conspirator there, I always forget her name, but she's there. They helped us out of some issues that we've had with the homeless. I just want to thank you all for your grants that you offer us. We are cooking 7 days a week to help anybody that needs help. Our numbers have been, a normal day is like 110 people to like 178 on Sunday we fed at Hollister. I just want to thank you for all your support. And I know there's an issue, but I can't fix it. And some of the people behind me I know can't fix it, but we're hoping that you all resolve this problem. I've noticed a lot of unfamiliar faces coming in. I've had some situations that when I'm there's no situations, but when I'm not there, because they know I call officers. I'm not sure where the people are coming from, but our local homeless people do have issues, and I agree with the gentleman about Stuart Marchman. If we can fund them coming back here, you know what, give them a room in the city hall or somewhere that they could come help. You know, that we really, really need that mental health here. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Yes, ma'am, come ahead.
Teresa Pope, New Smyrna Beach Housing Authority, 1101 South Dixie Freeway. We run a community resource center at 600 Greenlawn Street and welcomed Stuart Marchman into our center about last year. We do have an office in our center that's been serving Stuart Marchman. It's a separate office. We gave it to him free of charge. But with the COVID, of course, that's been shut down until things are a little clearer for us. But I think there needs to be some more word out there that we do have Stuart Marchman back in our area. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. All right. Seeing no other public comments, I know we all have thoughts and ideas on this, but definitely want to hear from the experts in the room. So at this point, we'll open it up for Chief Coffin.
Mayor, Commissioners, I'm going to go through the first few slides of this presentation fairly quickly because, as someone said earlier, this is kind of a review and there's not a lot of new stuff here. So whenever you're ready. The causes of homelessness, you guys can look at this online. The presentation's uploaded. What I want to point out there is of these 7, really only 2 are enforcement related in terms of substance abuse and domestic violence. The rest of these involve some type of issue, whether it be economic or mental health or PTSD, whatever. It doesn't involve, it should not involve law enforcement. And I'm going to expand on that in just a few minutes. Kelly. Common service needs for the homeless, obviously, these are no-brainers. Some of these are more important than others. But again, this is all pretty basic. Go ahead, Kelly. The challenges, I cannot overstate this enough. This is an immensely complex problem that has no easy solutions to it whatsoever. It's expensive to deal with. There are laws, there are court rulings that tie the hands of government, and it's just, for everybody in the audience and anybody listening at home, it is a very difficult problem to address. From the lack of affordable housing to a lack of space in shelters, and you're going to hear from the First Step Shelter folks here in just a few minutes, and they'll tell you what their challenges are. Not enough case management. You will hear that as a resounding theme in dealing with folks that are homeless. Poor communication. When you're trying to communicate with people who don't have as much as a post office box or an address, there's no way for them to get traditional snail mail. And then there are some agencies that don't want to deal in email. And then, of course, law enforcement becomes the default provider. Randy Herman, God bless him, I love him, and he's an extremely intelligent man, and he does a great job. What Randy will be able to tell you, though, is I don't think that Randy's ever worked at 2 o'clock in the morning when a police officer is out dealing with a homeless person in the middle of New Smyrna Beach. So the challenge when you try to put mental health folks or substance abuse counselors into the field is that's great from 8 to 4 Monday through Friday, but it's Saturday night, Sunday morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, those folks aren't anywhere to be found. So the default provider becomes law enforcement. You've been hearing lately in the media with the protests that are going on, they talk about defunding the police and then funding these mental health counselors and substance abuse counselors and other people who are more appropriate to handle these types of problems. They're absolutely right. But I don't know of anywhere around where they do that 24/7, 365. We're the default folks. So when we talk about categories of homelessness, and you've heard from some folks tonight, you've also read quite a bit about this. Episodic homelessness, these are the people who are what we call either barely homeless or near homeless. You know, they are one broken down car or medical bill that needs to be paid away from being homeless. These are the folks that I think that are not the easiest to help, but if we could identify these folks, we could prevent some of these folks from being homeless. And I think this is an area where we should concentrate on as a city. Mayor and I were talking earlier about where we put any of the city funds together. I think funding initiatives to keep people from being homeless will be more effective than trying to take someone who's chronically homeless and integrate them back in society. That's my personal opinion. I don't attribute that to anybody else other than me. The chronically homeless, I think that's what a lot of folks here are talking about. The folks down that live in the Tabby House Project, the folks down on Canal Street, on Flagler Avenue, at Cooper, where our chronically homeless are most visible. There's a host of reasons why they're chronically homeless, but homelessness is a way of life for them. There are certain people that you can try to help, and then there are certain people that just don't want our help. And dealing with the homeless, episodic homeless, and the people who are trying to get back on their feet is completely different from trying to deal with someone who is chronically homeless and says, I just don't care, this is my life, and this is what I'm going to do. So when you look at dealing with folks, there's no one size that fits all answer to this. Healthcare becomes a real issue, and when we talk about the heavy burden of illness, what happens here, especially in New Smyrna, is when people have non-emergent type care that they need, they go to the ER. That's problematic for a bunch of reasons. One, it's very expensive to do preventative health care and non-emergent health care at the ER. And two, it clogs up that ER for someone who may really need it. So that is not a good solution for trying to provide health care to the homeless. There are a bunch of things we can do for that. One of the things I've talked about with city leadership and with the fire department is providing the fire department providing some preventative health care initiatives that they can do there. We have wonderful people that work in our fire department, some who are RNs, and that would be very, very good at providing preventative health care for people out on the street. So that's one possible answer. Infectious diseases are always a problem, especially for first responders. Volusia County is one of the leaders in the state for hepatitis A. It's a huge problem here, and it causes not only problems in the homeless community, but it's problems for first responders. Go ahead, Kelly. So, whose problem is it? The reason I'm standing up here, two reasons, is because I have an interest in this. I live here in this city, and the other reason is because somebody's got to be the bad guy, and I'm the only one wearing a vest here tonight. All these people behind me that want to stab me in the back or shoot me, they can't get me because I got the vest on. But what I can tell you is it's absolutely not the police problem. We are part of what I hope is the solution, but we cannot arrest our way out of homelessness. We will not solve this problem anywhere on the planet by enacting more ordinances and providing more enforcement. It has to be a holistic approach, and I believe, and I've told this to the mayor earlier, I believe this needs to be a community-led effort. Amen. What that looks like, I can give you some perfect examples of it, and there are some out there that work. I've got an email from somebody yesterday who talked about Open Table. That's an initiative we should look at and research, and whether it's that or it's led by a community group that we can create, that is really the only way that we'll make a dent in this. If we're relying on us to arrest our way out of homelessness, this problem will only get worse. So again, how do we address the problem? We educate about social services, the 3 E's, encourage, and the last is to enforce some ordinances. When I say that you can't arrest your way out of this problem, that doesn't mean that we don't need to have ordinances and use enforcement where it's warranted. But again, that needs to be the very last step for the people that we've tried to help multiple times, and they just refuse and say, I'm going to live my life the way I want to live it. I'm going to use drugs and alcohol, and I'm going to not treat New Smyrna like it's my home. I'm going to treat it like somebody else's home. So with that said, back in February, you'll remember, I proposed some non-sworn personnel, specifically some community services officers and mental health professionals. And I said that back then, before all this nonsense started with that we're experiencing in the world right now for defunding the police, I said this is the direction I think that we need to go. I don't know that we need more police officers. I'd like to be able to fill the positions I have. But I think with homeless outreach teams involving a police officer, specially trained, and I've got both of my victim advocates here tonight, Fauna and Donna, and they're outstanding in what they do. They are a critical part of our family in the police department, and they do a wonderful job. So if I could just clone them and put them with a police officer, I could solve a lot of our problems. You guys look at the daily log, and every day we're dealing with the homeless. Every day we're dealing with mental health. We're Baker acting people multiple times a day, and every day we're dealing with substance abuse. So I think the best way to handle that is through a homeless outreach team. We've talked about this before. They're not a service provider, they're a bridge to the services. They provide referrals, diversion, and enforcement when all else fails. The one critical piece of this that will help the other agencies around us is the data collection. The data collection will give us an accurate count of what we're dealing with in terms of homeless. What somebody said earlier is Donna said earlier, we don't know where they come from. Well, we need to find out where they're coming from. We need to find out why they're coming here. And we need to help them get where they need to go. We talked earlier, the mayor and I did, we provided a gentleman that was staying downtown recently. We talked to him, and we found out that his family lived in Kentucky. So what we did was we got him back to his family in Kentucky. We contacted them. We got him a bus ticket. We put some money in his pocket. We fed him, and we got him back to Kentucky to reunite with his family. That's not moving the problem somewhere else. That's taking the problem and looking what's the underlying cause of a problem and solving the underlying cause. I tell my officers this all the time: solve the underlying problem. So with this one guy, that's an example of how we did that. And I think that's how we can have these homeless outreach teams help in some way with the police department. I hold no illusions that the police department is not going to be involved in this. Because again, most of the things we deal with are late at night, early in the morning, in the rain, on weekends, holidays, and we're it. But what we need is some help. So that's my presentation in fast forward. And I'm going to turn it over now to Victoria Fahlberg, who is the CEO First Step Shelter, and she's going to give you all an overview of what First Step could provide.
And as Victoria comes, just real quick for the commission. So we've heard from Chief Coffin, we'll hear from Victoria. Right after that, Chris has got the attorney that actually drafted. We've all heard of the ordinances in Daytona. Commission staff handed out a bunch of articles about that. We have that attorney is actually going to be calling in, and so he's going to give us just a quick kind of briefing. So we're going to kind of getting through all of that, and then we'll open it back up, and these folks will all be available for questions as we need. So, yes. Thank you.
So, hi, I'm Victoria Fallberg. I'm the director of First Step Shelter, which opened December 16th. And so I don't forget at the end of this presentation, I just want to invite you all out if you're interested in getting a tour of what the shelter's like once you make your decisions about what direction you want to head in. So this is Heath. He was one of our first residents. He's now in housing. He is a person who had a lot of challenges, but now he's got his own place and he's doing pretty well. So in 2015, Dr. Robert Marmot came out to this area, and he worked with a lot of the communities in this area in what was called the Volusia County Task Force. And one of the things that he believed is that a shelter is extremely important, a transformational shelter in getting these people back on their feet, because it gives them an opportunity to actually be somewhere stable during a certain period of time in which they can get all of these services they need and just have some kind of stability in their life. And so one little thing I'll just mention that is something that happened to me just in watching people is that we have people who come in and they look like they've been living on the street for a really long time. If you look at these same people a month later, they look so different you couldn't even imagine, after they've actually slept all night without, bugs crawling on them, without worrying that somebody's going to attack them or steal their things or whatever. They're sleeping, they're eating regularly, and they're starting to get the services they need. And one of the things we do with the shelter is that we will assist, but we do whatever we can to not be enablers. We really want to give people the opportunity to find their own, to get their own services. So we make referrals, we show them what to do, but then we kind of like put it up to them as much as they can. Whenever they need help, we'll come back in and help them. And every person has their own journey. But that's just one of the things I've seen. So now we've started taking photos of pictures when they enter the shelter, like before they go through intake. Because what we do at intake, as soon as they get through sort of the initial clearance for any kind of a weapon they might have or contraband, they see our nurses, and then they get showered, they get clean clothing, and they and then kind of go through the intake process. And so we're starting to take those photos because they just even for them it's like they just look so different. I just wanted to start, usually I put successes at the end, and I like to grab people's attention at the beginning. I found that's more effective. But we recently had some really great stories in the News Journal. Like I said, we've only been open since the end of December. We've already gotten a good number of people into housing, and Sandy is one of those people. So there's Sandy, and then the next one is Sabrina. She also had a story in the News Journal. And then we posted the journal articles on our Facebook page, and then, so then Donna, who had already been in housing for a little bit longer, she posted her own. So she's actually in college now. She already had the job in the apartment when she left the shelter, because when people have housing, they have to have financial resources to pay their rent. So even if they get a subsidy, they still need help. Usually they still need rent help, but they always need help with their utilities or with their food or with whatever other expenses that they have in their life. So that's part of also what we do at the shelter. This is the organizational structure of the shelter. I'm not going to dwell on this. You all have probably heard that when we opened the shelter, we were with a contracted operator, which was Catholic Charities. And over the last months, Catholic Charities felt like it would work better with the shelter if they kind of gave it back to us, which we kind of like that idea. And so this is the way we're going to be starting this new organizational structure on August 2nd. So this is how it's going to be. But One thing I'll tell you that's happened during the pandemic is as we were getting started and we were starting to get these volunteers come in, going through our orientation and everything, and then the pandemic hit. So what happened then is that the volunteers basically didn't want to be there anymore because it's not safe. And it was probably better for our volunteers as well because we try to limit outside contacts. I mean, we do have people who go to work and come back in, but we're really strict with our social distancing rules and masks that people have to use when they're not in the shelter. So that cut down on our volunteers. But fortunately, we have enough of regular staff that we're able to get by as much as we need to. Everything is still going really well. So the kind of things that we offer, I did mention that we have nurses. We have a health unit at the shelter, which is staffed by nurses from Halifax Health, and the health unit itself is funded by Advent Health, Florida Blue Foundation, and Halifax Health. And so they provide really wonderful services. One of the things I've done is I provided you all with a handout because to go through all of the services provided by our health unit is really too much for a presentation. So you all have these somewhere. If you don't, I'll get them to you. And so then also just all of our case management services is also on a handout for you. So we really, whatever a person needs, when people come in, we request that they have a social security number, so they have an identity. We need an identity because people do have to go through a background check. We need to know who's in the shelter. But if they, so as long as they have that, even if they don't have a birth certificate. So that's one of the things that we've had to do. For people to be eligible for any kind of a service around, generally they need to have a birth certificate for not every service, but for many services. Often a Social Security will do, but it's not sufficient. So we do help people get a birth certificate when they need it. That's kind of like a starting point for those who don't have it. And then it goes through, the nurses will do a medication evaluation and set people up with psychiatric appointments if they need psychotropic medications. We have our case managers who set them up with behavioral health appointments, whether that's for, alcohol or drug addiction or just regular therapeutic services. So we set those up, and we have people that will go out into the community. Usually that's through SMA Health. And that way, too, we try to establish these connections that they have in the community so that when they go into their own independent housing, they still have people that their support system. So we try to build them a support system as they're at the shelter. So we also have educational services. We've had people working on their GED until that closed down, but they will go back and do that. We get people, we've been working with Daytona State College, so if we have people who do want to go back, want to go to college, go back to college who are qualified, we can set that up. We did have volunteers coming in to do tutoring. We had a number of people finishing up their GED, having some problems with the math section, and so we had tutors coming in to do that. And we do all of that, too, to help people get jobs. We've been working with CareerSource, so they are able to help people, and we'll also help them ourselves too, but teach them how to fill out job applications and in some cases resumes, depending on what kind of work the person is looking for. So anyway, we provide just, you kind of name it, we will provide the case management. It's whatever these people need to get back on their feet, become self-sufficient, and be able to live in housing and be a productive member of society. So another thing is life skills. We teach, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but those are courses that we give while people are at the shelter. And then I already mentioned employment and housing. So we have, so far since we've opened, we've been able to get 20 residents into permanent housing, and we've been able to help 41 residents get jobs. And so I will say that some of the residents are not able to work. They have mental or physical disabilities that prevent them from working. In those cases, what we do is we get them, we apply for SSDI. We've been pretty good at getting that. Our case managers are all SOAR certified, which means that they're capable of filling out all of those applications. We also have a good number of residents who are over the age of 65, and often they have Social Security that they're not claiming, so we can help them with that as well. And one of the things that the chief mentioned was the cost to hospitals for homeless people. So one of the things that we do is we really make an attempt to get people insurance. So whether it's through Medicare, Medicaid, or other insurance, once people have insurance, then they aren't that same burden on the hospitals. So not only can they go to a primary care person for preventative care and their other needs rather than going to the emergency department, but when they do need hospital care, then they have insurance that can pay for it. So we do have some contracted services. As I mentioned, we have our work with the Halifax nurses that are in our health unit. We work with SMA Health. We currently have a contract with them. They're doing our behavioral health screenings because we do have a number of people who come into the shelter who, yeah, they will see our nurses, and that's around like what medications they're already taking, because we have to figure out, you know, what are they taking. So this is kind of detailed. Everybody has their own locker where we keep the medications that they need all secure. But when we aren't sure if they need more medication for other mental health issues, we do have a trained behavioral therapist at the shelter who can do those screenings and then refer them on to SMA. We currently have so when we opened, the shelter did not have a kitchen. Had space for a kitchen, but there was nothing there because the stuff for the kitchen had been ordered but not shipped, or what, I don't know. It actually took a couple of months after we were operating to get the kitchen completely installed. And right about that time that we were hoping to transition to a full kitchen, the pandemic started, and so now we are transitioning. It's a little bit slower, and my hope is that on that August 2nd turning point when the shelter board starts running the shelter, you know, ourselves, that we'll also be transitioning to using our full food. But we also have a laundry service contract with the jail, which has been really great. It's super cheap, and it really, like there's other staff people now we don't need to have because we have that contract. You probably know our location is across the street from the jail, so it actually has worked out really well. And then the last thing is that for the overnight, we have security service that comes in and helps to just oversee things during the nighttime hours. And in part, that's because by contracting out, we don't have to provide, because we're a 24-hour service, it can become extremely costly if you're hiring everybody yourself. And if you have somebody who calls in sick, then, you know, it's very complicated. So this has been a really good way for us to keep costs down for the overnight hours when there's less activity. These are our community partners.
If I can just interrupt you real quick, I'm doing a quick check on the time. We're at 5:45. I know we've got this other attorney calling in as well, and I want to make sure we have at least a little time to talk through. So just if we can, as quick as we can
slide through everything you want me to.
It's a lot of great information. We've probably tried to cram too much into this one session, but it's a lot of great information. But if there's anything we can go through quickly on this part, it'd be
sure,
great.
No problem. Anyway, I mentioned most of our partners anyway. The life skill classes, this is really just to help people. I would say the bottom line is this: if you're going to function well in society, you need to know how to get along with other people. You need to know the social etiquette, you need to know how to be a friend, and you need to know how to be friends with other people. And so those are some of the things that go into our life skill curriculum. They get 4 times a week, an hour-long class. Our referrals are usually broken down through social services, and places of worship, about 24%. About 45% are referred from law enforcement. About 21% come from the hospitals. And so with this next slide, I've asked, this is Lieutenant Nicolo. He works for the Daytona Beach Police Department. He's our liaison at the shelter. And so he's just going to talk to you a little bit about that.
Excellent, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Lieutenant Nicolo, Daytona Beach Police Department. Due to the time constraints, I'll try to be as succinct as I can. Part of my duties is to be liaison with the shelter. My Chief Capri, values all the partnerships in the community. We understand, just like Chief mentioned earlier, that the police cannot solve this problem on our own, so it's important that we all work together. Last year I was asked to come aboard and help with the preparations for particularly the intake process. That was one of the many things I was a part of. So we wanted to design a process that was practical, that was feasible for law enforcement, for social services to get people into the shelter based on the criteria that the shelter board felt was most appropriate for them. So very quickly I'll go through the shelter criteria. First of all, this is not a surprise, they actually have to be homeless. They have to be 18 years of age or older, cannot be accompanied by a child under the age of 18, must be a resident of Volusia County. This is really important. If you look into this at all, you'll find that shelters quickly get inundated by people from other counties, other states. I visited Pinellas Safe Harbor over in Tampa last year, and the lieutenant who runs that shelter said they'll get people from literally all over the country put on a bus and shipped there. So that's a struggle that you have to be cognizant of. They can't have any open warrants. The philosophy behind that is if someone has an open warrant, it precludes them from getting housing and from getting jobs. So the most prudent thing to do is to tell that person, please take care of your warrant. If we can help in any way, we will, if it's just a court cost or something. But until you can get that warrant taken care of, you can't actually come and be a resident at the shelter. They cannot be a registered sexual offender or predator. They have to agree to participate in First Step shelter programming. They must be self-ambulatory, so this essentially means that they have to be able to take care of themselves, go to the bathroom on their own, take a shower, brush their teeth, that sort of thing. It doesn't mean they can't be in a wheelchair, but if you need that extra assistance, then there's really not the staff there to be able to take care of that. They must not meet Baker Act or Marchman Act criteria, so essentially you can't be suicidal or be so inebriated to the point that you can't function properly or make rational decisions. There are places for those people to go to get that treatment. They can't have any what's called emergent medical conditions. Essentially, if they have a medical condition that you look at them and you say, wow, you should probably go to the hospital and get checked out first. I won't go into all those, but once they get cleared from the hospital that they don't have any emergent medical conditions, then they're more than welcome to be brought into the shelter. Those are essentially the criteria for people coming into the shelter. So like I said, part of the process was to design an intake method for law enforcement to bring people in 24/7. As long as the people met the criteria, they could come to the shelter provided that there was available bed space. So really the two things that you need to knock off the top when you're out with someone who's out in the street as law enforcement is there available bed space? So you call the shelter to make sure, and does this person actually want to go to the shelter? And once you get past that, then our officers do background checks, excuse me here. And the background checks aren't anything super in-depth. If you know anything about law enforcement, a lot of the times when we get out with people, we check them for warrants, we make sure that they're, don't have any weapons on them or anything like that. So a lot of this stuff is essentially what you would do anyways. Let's say they want to go to the shelter. Make sure there's no open warrants, make sure they don't have any contraband or anything on them that the shelter prohibits, make sure that they're not suicidal or that they're not inebriated to the point where they can't function on their own. These are normal things that we check for. The only one additional step is just to check to see if they're a sexual offender or predator, and that takes 30 seconds online. There's a national sex offender database through the Department of Justice that you can check. So provided that comes back clear, the officer simply would just search the person before they get into their car. That's an officer safety issue. And check the bags, check the person, bring them to the shelter. When they get to the shelter, the staff member or the security member who's there would bring them in. The officer would stand by while they process the paperwork. There is a law enforcement referral form that was created. It's a simple 2-page PDF form, fill in the blanks. It's not rocket science. You print out the form, you give it to the shelter staff member who's taking them. They'll do an additional check of all their property and their persons just in case they miss something. Okay, sometimes the homeless people like to really cram stuff into their pockets or their socks or their bags because they don't want to lose it. So it's important to have a secondary check. And once that's completed, then the officer goes on their way. So that's essentially the law enforcement referral process. I will say with the COVID concerns, what Dr. Fallberg might talk about more with is getting those people tested for COVID, coming back negative at the hospital before bringing them into the shelter, so that way we don't put all the other people in the shelter at risk. Some of them do have health conditions like you heard about earlier, and we wouldn't want to jeopardize those people. That's not really the prudent way to go about that.
Thank you. Thanks for that summary.
So I'm almost finished, and I don't need to go over this. I just thought that as you all are thinking about what you want to do, just so you know, like this is pretty much the bare minimum of costs to run the shelter, and I'm leaving this PowerPoint so y'all can study this later. These are just some comparisons to about the costs per year, the cost from a homeless person to a housed person, the cost of space per day, and the 4524, 124, what I'll explain is that currently, because of funding, incomplete funding, we have a capacity for 45 residents, and we will have in August when the safe zone opens, capacity for 24 people in the safe zone. The shelter is built to capacity for 100, and so the goal in the next 12 months is to build up the budget so that we can actually open the shelter. Because if you look at the costs, there's a big difference, but if you look at the slide before, if you look at the bottom, you can see for 4524 residents, it's 1.3, but if you add another 55 residents, it only goes up by another 300,000. So there's so many fixed costs involved in the shelter. So, it's really our goal to just be able to bring in that other 300,000. So you can pass that one. And then I also thought this is for your information. The Marmot Plan that was done in 2015 established sort of guidelines for the different communities. And at that time, every community in the whole Volusia County, no matter where it was located, east, west, north, south, was included. And then what I did was I actually put what is actually being paid by the different counties. This is just for your information. These last slides are just pictures of our safe zone, the progress that's being made. This is the guard shack, and then the other space is going to be a 30 by 40 pavilion, and with fencing and everything. And then the guard shack will become the entrance for the entire place. So that's my presentation. Thank you all very much, and we'd love to see you come out for a tour.
Awesome. Thank you. And I hope you'll stick around if you're available. We may have some questions
Sure.
for you along the way. So, do we have the attorney on the line? Or? He's calling in now. And so this is, Carrie, do you want to provide any background on this real quick before?
So this is Michael Kahn. He's the attorney who's responsible for drafting the panhandling ordinance up in Daytona Beach. And he's on the phone with you now.
Okay, Mr. Kahn, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, we're going to try to, we're using old school technology here. We're going to try to broadcast you out. And so we've got 4 or 5 minutes here, and I guess our hope was if you can kind of help set the stage. We're obviously as a community having some of the same conversations other communities up and down the coast have had about homelessness and how we can address it. We've had some great community conversation here tonight, but interested in your perspective on what you've done in other communities, what those what the initial steps were in that process, and any potential fallout, I guess, that you've seen from that.
Sure. Should I start now?
Yep, sure, go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and my name is Michael Kahn. I practice law in Melbourne, Florida. Over the years, I've, since 1986, practiced First Amendment law, and if you count rewrites, because some cities like St. Augustine, I've represented 5 times. If you count all the rewrites I've done, I've represented between 30 and 35 Florida cities and counties doing their First Amendment work. I'm a Duke Law graduate, so for any Carolina fans out there, I'm really sorry. Launching into the point is, in my First Amendment work of recent note, I've done panhandling ordinances for several towns and have been retained by 2 towns right now to do panhandling ordinances. Let me first say that the panhandling ordinances have really very little to do with homelessness. And that's a very important point to make to you in this because of your workshop focusing on homeless. Not all homeless people are panhandlers. Not all panhandlers are homeless. And that's very important to say. In my ordinances that I've done, I don't not mention homelessness. Is there some intersection between the two? Yes, but that's not really what I'm regulating, and I make that very clear in all my jurisdictions. I'm regulating the secondary effects of panhandling, which have negatively impacted many towns and cities. Panhandling, begin with, is First Amendment protected speech. So in my regulations, I am regulating the location of panhandling and some of their activities, but I'm also protecting their rights. And that's also a very important point to say. I'm not banning panhandling. I'm regulating it. Because in First Amendment jurisdictions and legislation, all speech can be regulated by time, place, and manner. The impact of my ordinances, most notably to your northern, not neighbor, because I know Port Orange is your neighbor to the northwest, Daytona Beach, was profound. Why I asked Chris to forward to you press pack because the press are notoriously independent. They didn't look to praise me; they just looked to report. And basically, the ordinance that I structured for Daytona Beach had a profound effect. The public interest in Daytona Beach. For example, panhandlers were accosting people at streetlights, signalized intersections, to the point, and I had numerous in my ordinance testimony from people who were accosted by panhandlers. Well, my ordinance basically pushed panhandling back 150 feet from the signalized intersections in Daytona. And one of the articles started off like this in the press, February 7, 2019, quote, "It was like someone flipped a switch," end quote. Another article began this way, quote, "Familiar sound filled the Daytona Beach City Commission chambers Wednesday, applause," end quote. That is because of the public impact of the ordinance that I've been able to prepare. The ordinance has thus far been unchallenged. The reason for that is very simple. Well, it's not very simple. It's actually complex. One of the reasons is that I lay a very substantial record in support of the ordinance. And each record is the aggregate of all of my work on panhandling, meaning that Augustine's ordinance had 2,000 pages in support of it, which were testimony of witnesses, employees, employers, tourists, talking about the effects of panhandling. Daytona Beach had 4,000 pages of record behind it. Too many cities and counties, as I tell my city and county council, the lawyers couldn't do First Amendment work at home. You know, it's a specialized area, and that's what I do. So your ordinance, I'm working on Del Rey's. Del Rey is one step ahead of you in the queue, but so Del Rey's ordinance is going to have 6,000 pages of record behind it, and your ordinance, you know, God willing, if I'm retained, will have 8,000 pages of record in support of it. So that's one of the reasons that my ordinances have not been challenged. Now, if they were, I would defend, and I expect to win, because ordinances are up to the current case law, most notably a Supreme Court case called Reed versus Gilbert. And so there's a lot of record support for it, but the ordinance itself is very carefully crafted to address the most current case law. So that's a second reason that my ordinances have not yet been challenged. My ordinances are map-based. What I mean by that, they set forth different distance parameters. I spoke about 150 feet from signalized intersections. There's also, to protect your schools, you've got 4 elementary schools, you've got 2 middle schools and a high school. Each one of those schools will have a 100-foot circumference around their property line to protect the children from the adverse secondary effects of panhandling. You've also got wonderful historic downtown area and the Canal Street Historic District. I'll be looking at special protections for certain areas of New Smyrna Beach. Not just, because each ordinance is carefully tailored to meet the local requirements. That's another reason why the ordinances are so strong. They're not boilerplate ordinances. For example, in Daytona Beach, had a section of boardwalk that was being accosted. They had a Hilton hotel where the panhandlers were actually invading the cabanas. And so what I did there was I prohibited in that short area the panhandling. There's certain other areas that are contained in my ordinances with 20-foot parameters. All entries and exits from commercial establishments will have a 20-foot parameter around them. ATMs stops will have 20-foot parameters around them. And in the end of all of it, panhandlers will have sufficient alternative avenues of communication in which they can panhandle. But they will be precluded from sensitive areas, such as areas where people are captives. That's why I mentioned ATMs. Outside dining areas, there'll be a 20-foot parameter around them. Now, throughout the town of New Smyrna, aggressive panhandling will be banned. And aggressive panhandling is very specifically, as you might imagine, defined in the ordinance. With this presentation, I'm certainly open to any questions. I'm trying to make it as brief as I can for you all. And let me just say one thing. If I'm retained, also I'll be spending quite a bit of time up there, as I did in Daytona Beach. Basically I was there a lot and in getting my work done. And what is that work? Well, that work is I'm going to be talking to your police chief, Chief Coffin. I'll be talking to your fire chief. And fire and EMTs are very important testifying witnesses, because it's the EMTs who really do the groundwork many times in saving the lives of panhandlers and in cleaning up after the mess they make. So I'll be talking to EMTs who will be my witnesses. Chief Coffin is going to designate one of his officers or more who can testify as to the adverse secondary effects of panhandlers. Chief Capri and in Daytona Beach and Chief Fox and I are very good friends. And basically, we got tremendous testimony from, for example, Chief Capri had one officer, JT, who was very familiar with all the areas, and he was my main witness, but there were about 7 officers who testified.
Okay.
Also, Department of Public Works will testify, and I will identify, because I have a great physician up in Daytona Beach and also in St. Augustine, who will also be giving testimony as to some of the medical data that highlight the adverse secondary effects of panhandling. And I want to mention something post-COVID. Ordinances are also mitigate against pandemic and COVID. And let me tell you exactly why. The medical data supporting these ordinances is going to show that some of the hygienic habits of panhandlers do not comport with the CDC or WHO guidelines. And by regulating them, that, it is going to be, if you can imagine what I'm talking about, the linkage to regulating panhandling is also regulating and curbing some of the hygienics of panhandlers that can contribute easily to the spread of COVID and pandemics, and that's what my medical experts have informed me, that it will be wasn't a part of Daytona Beach's ordinance, but it will strengthen your ordinance as well, the testimony that will come from that.
Okay.
So basically, for being retained, we will have 2 specially set hearings. I'll work with Chris on specially setting those hearings.
So let me just cut you off real quick. So we've got about 10 minutes left here to solve homelessness in New Smyrna in this workshop before we dismiss.
Gotcha.
So I think it's been great information and for a first step. Because of how we're having to do this with technology, I think it's going to be real hard to funnel questions back to you. I'm going to give you back to Chris here, and if we come up with any questions, we can maybe call you back or get those after this meeting. But thank you for taking the time.
I'll be glad to answer, and on different circumstances. I was going to come up there tonight. We just got really, we had some...
Totally understand.
Take care of it, Chris. You were very kind.
Talk to him. Jeez, he bills by the hour, but so... But he didn't, he's not, tonight was, yeah, we got our money. Tonight was actually free. Since we agreed to do it telephonically, he did not charge us for tonight. Okay, listen, this has all been, any one of these, the first step and the police, any one of these, we probably could have taken the full hour to really dive in. So we have another meeting coming up in 12, was that right? No, 22 minutes. So, gentlemen, I want to just run down the road real quick. Obviously, we're not going to solve homelessness in the next 22 minutes. So my question is, are there any questions of staff, any directions? I know I have a ton of questions. I learned a lot tonight. I probably have more questions than answers at this point, though. But I'll open it up, but ask each of you just be as brief as possible, acknowledging the time. So we'll begin with... Commissioner Hartman, I'll actually begin with you. I know you've done a lot in this space and a lot of workshops and everything, so we'll start with you.
So I think it's already been said, we're not going to solve all the problems. So we need to target those people who we actually can make a difference with. And I think that's those that are not yet homeless or just became homeless. And we need to find some alternatives for those individuals to get them the help that they need. Chief and I sat on a year-long committee and discussed exactly the same things, and we learned exactly the same things. The faith-based groups and the social services aren't communicating amongst themselves, and nobody really knows who's doing what. And then when they find out that they're doing it, then they all want a piece of the pie, kind of to speak. But the important part, from what I took the whole year was, and Chief can shake his head, is you got to identify the people and get them recorded, because without records, you can't help them, And we need to designate, are we truly looking at trying to work with the homeless, or are we dealing with the panhandlers? Because they're completely 2 different sets of people. And I actually know some who are not homeless and are panhandling. So, and then everything that I've read, all the conferences I've gone to, the quickest way to solve homelessness is affordable housing or intermediate housing, something to get those people through. So we need to work with the Housing Authority, some of the faith-based groups, and we need to look at some options that way and how we're going to deal with the problem, because you're not going to legislate it out and you're not going to arrest them out. The problem will always be here, but we need to target the ones who truly want the help, and we can help, and work towards that goal. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of thoughts on this. I'll make it brief. I want to thank everybody who came out. You look at the crowd tonight and you see how passionate people are about this. I've been in a lot of meetings with, with Titled Homeless, and It's very complex, and all it needs is resources and money, and that's, of course, what is limited. So I also want to target, we can't deal with this, and I believe in a holistic issue. We've been down this road many times. It'd be nice to, but what I want to focus on and drill down on is what is our specific problem that brought us here tonight. And that is, and I may use the term inaccurately, what I refer to or believe is the chronic homeless. The chronic homeless are the ones who are showing up in our business districts. Now we have a mixed use with residential and business, and these people are parking themselves and becoming a problem for both the residents and the businesses trying to function as they need to. I want to drill down and figure out and focus how we deal with that. So I agree with Commissioner Hartman that I want to narrow this down a little bit, but I don't know if we can help. I'm not sure what category they fit into. I hear 30–40% of the homeless are mentally ill. I suspect that the number that I'm referring to, that I'm seeing, is most of them are mentally ill, have some component of mental illness. And also, many of them have a problem exacerbated, the mental illness exacerbated by a drug and or alcohol dependency. So the first question or issue that I want to raise on this is, you can't help someone unless they want to help themselves. So, and I have some experience in this. How do you help someone who's mentally ill, who's too mentally ill to recognize that they have a problem? That is almost impossible. And I am amazed. I really appreciate, Victoria, I apologize, I didn't get your last name, but the question is, what you're doing there is fantastic. And I do want to come out and see what you're doing. But I don't know if that's a different element or not of what I'm referring to. But the key is, how do you help people who don't want to be helped or don't know that they have a problem? So, and that is a big challenge. So I want to, my challenge to my fellow commissioners and my staff is, we're not going to solve the, quote, homeless population. The question is, how do we deal with the immediate issue of a population that is increasing, where they're on the, they're surrounding the business districts, they're coming on Canal Street, they're on Flagler, they're on US 1, people have to chase them out. The question is, how do we deal with that specific issue? Is there a way to deal with that?
Yes, there is.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Commissioner Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It seems through no fault of societies that we're failing the homeless people through lack of funds, lack of resources. The homeless population is growing due to the hard times that our nation is facing. And locally, I think our problem is homeless people will congregate where they can feel safe and find the resources that thankfully people like Donna will provide, food. They find shelter where they can, unfortunately around Tabby House, very nice properties. Usually what we find in our city is they'll congregate in our downtown area where they can find these resources. This question came up several years ago. Commissioner McGurk and I, and even Commissioner Hartman would recall when these conversations began, how do we help our homeless and how do we stop them from becoming vagrant and possibly sometimes causing crime, being problems in our communal areas where we live, where our residents are, and find that they're interfacing, causing crime and vagrancy. So my basic question is, how do we take a bite out of this problem? And when the homeless shelter, when First Step first presented themselves, it was a great motive, but all the parts weren't put together. And basically, I remember First Step coming to us and saying, well, we might need about $80,000. And I think all of us commissioners and mayor looked at each other, well, what do we get for $80,000 at a shelter that's just a concept? It was 20+ miles away in the center of the county, which might be a good location, but how do we transport people there who want to go there? The logistics were just almost insurmountable. And again, we go back to having the resources. We can't rely on our police department to do everything, to be the psychiatrist and the nurse and the welfare agent. So somehow we have to maybe engage First Step again. But I understand your resources seem limited with 40 to 50 beds. Do you have room for us? How could we work out a fee schedule for those who would like to go?
So one of the reasons I put the one slide on there towards the end about what the other communities are paying is that there is no, I'm not here to tell you what you have to pay. Back in 2017, when the other communities made their decisions, you can see what they are for yourself. After we're operating for a year, maybe longer, I do believe that there'll be a decision made about how we want to go about making those decisions about what each community is fair. But right now, we're not doing that. Right now, we're looking at what was initially established, and we would really like the communities to come as close to that as possible. But everybody doesn't. So I just wanted to be really open with you all about that. So in regard to the 45 and how it would work, it's really first come, first serve. The way that people get to the shelter, no matter where they're from, is either through law enforcement, is through a social service agency, or through the hospitals, or a place of worship. And one of the reasons that we didn't like that is so people would have a way to get there, because even though it's much closer if you're living in Daytona Beach, I mean, the fact is it's 6 miles away from sort of 95. It's a good ways out there. It's not along the road for anyone. So most of the people, I mean, you could take a bus, but even that is a little bit awkward. And certainly, well, anyway, but that's the way it would work. If you would like to participate in the shelter, we would welcome you, and we would be willing to definitely work out, something that I think you would find affordable. And one thing there's a couple things I want to say is we do have the chronically homeless single men and women at our shelter, and they do get better, and they do go into housing. So I just wanted to make that really clear, is that those are the people that we're seeing. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think probably we'll have to have a deeper conversation around that with her. I'm not trying to rush that, but I am rushing it tonight. We're not going to be able to get there.
In agreement with Commissioner Hartman, housing is the next big step. And where could we and where would we help them for those who have the wherewithal to take what we would offer them?
Exactly.
Big problem. Thanks.
Vice Mayor.
Going back to the beginning with the chief, the police, I would like to see them develop a partnership with a non-sworn officer as the first contact that they would have with a homeless person. I think that way we could sort out the difference, because there are different classes of homeless people. There are some that are panhandlers. There's regular people that are panhandlers, and they have to be dealt with very specifically, primarily for the benefit of our residents, which is first and foremost thing that we should deal with. Second thing is there are homeless people by choice, and they just prefer to be homeless. They rely on some social services, but in their minds they don't feel like they need to be rehabilitated. Last year, at my request, we doubled the amount of money that we give to the faith-based groups, such as the churches and the civic groups who provide food and provide hygiene products and similar types of things for it. So that's a step that we did take, and it may need to be increased. The other is the people who are homeless not by choice, whether they are now divorced and separated, whether they have children that they can't care for, whether they're living in their cars. Those are the homeless that I think really need an additional leg up by us in the city. And it seems to me that First Step has their fingers on the pulse of the way to do that. And I think we should come to agreement with them how we can help them out and how our city can benefit, as well as the homeless people. So I would like to see us go in that direction. Prior to coming to New Smyrna, I worked with a number of social services organizations that each chose to pick a segment of society, such as unwed mothers, and help them out with caring for children, how to get their education, and get their own apartments. And there are ways to work at that. And it seems to me that First Step is our best and probably our only choice around here to make an overall improvement. Thank you.
Okay. So it's 6:22. We only have a few more minutes here. So Chief, I just have one question for you. It's almost impossible, but I agree with almost everything that was said by my fellow commissioners. I think we all see the problems. We all empathize with some of the circumstances and the issues. So my question, though, is you heard the one speaker and some of the stories about some of the aggressiveness getting worse. I mean, it feels like we're getting to this point where it's more of an immediate issue. And so we can talk about trying to solve this broader problem, but then we have some like immediate, feeling, people not feeling safe. And I heard one person say, these folks consider themselves residents, and then somebody else that may have even been chief, but they say, treat NSB like they live here, like act like a resident. So I think we're starting to see, and what the community I think is feeling, is this kind of divergence between people that we've cohabitated with forever that just have a different path in life and maybe need a hand up or whatever, and then we've got this kind of other element coming in. So is there anything tonight, is there anything tomorrow that I know you're probably already doing stuff, but what can we say to those folks that are feeling that while we sort out some of these bigger issues?
You all have a very, probably the best analysis of the Pottinger case that I've seen between Carrie and Chris. They provided a very excellent legal analysis about what you can and can't do with ordinances. Been waiting on this workshop to figure out how we're going to address some of those ordinances, and right away my first recommendation is we tried a period of time where we had open container of alcohol as a non-criminal infraction, where we wrote a civil citation type thing. I'm going to recommend to the commission that we go back and revisit that and allow us to recriminalize that. There's more time than what I've got available to talk about tonight of how we're going to do that, the mechanics of that, and there will be some cost involved in that, but I think that's the very first thing we can do to address people who are abusing alcohol in public. And again, that's where I talk about how they're treating this. They're not treating this like their home, they're treating this like somebody else's home. So I think that we can do that, but when we talk about enacting ordinances that deal with the sustaining of life type things, we have to be very careful there, because as you read in that analysis from Chris and Carrie, that's where we're going to get ourselves in trouble. So we can do some things short term, but I'm going to need to bring that back in front of the commission in the form of an ordinance.
Okay, and thank you for that. And I agree, that was a great assessment. For those of you not familiar, it's a public record, so city attorney's office can get that to you if you could care to read it. But the legal team put together a great summary of Pottinger Act, and which is kind of the overarching regulation that influences a lot of things that happen in this space. So my next question for my commission is, really there were two things that kind of came up. Number one is, you heard from the one attorney talking about panhandling and what has been enacted elsewhere. Do we want to give staff any direction on trying to move forward with that, or are we pressing pause on that for now? I need quick.
I would like to task staff with adding to as many tools they can in the toolbox to prevent this aggressiveness as soon as possible. So yes.
Okay. Other comments on that angle? I'm going to go to the first step next, but on the...
Yeah, I support that.
Okay.
Definitely support prohibiting panhandling. That's just one little facet. My major concern...
Not prohibiting panhandling, just so we're clear, just working with the attorney that will help us to maybe enhance our ordinances to better manage that in our city, I believe is it's not a complete prohibition. We just have to be careful what we say there.
So we cannot prohibit panhandling?
Not entirely, no. And you heard him talk about the First Amendment elements of that. That's
Right.
It's a sticky issue.
And that's what I'd like to see for our education, what we can provide as relief for
Okay.
our residents who live here
Agreed.
through the First Amendment.
All right, so I think we got pretty universal agreement, continue trying to move forward, and you may have to bring it back to us at some other meeting as far as from a budget standpoint, but I think we do want to continue working with him. So then the second question is, first step. I mean, Pottenger compliance is something we don't have access to at the moment. We're not a partner with First Step. You heard some of those challenges. I think, gentlemen, that's honestly something we'll have to just bring back before us. We're going to have another workshop like this as soon as we come back from break or some other time. So and I think we'll have to just talk through that at that time, because I got a ton of questions about that. So,
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think that we should have the staff start some conversations with them, because we're going to partner. Our budget's coming up soon, and I would like some type of guidance as to what we have available and what we can do, because I think that's very important.
I agree with that suggestion, actually, if Mike talk about it. But I think for New Smyrna, I think we can make progress. We can bring some solutions to the table and make progress, because I think what I've heard from our community is the past year or so hasn't felt like progress. It's felt like regression. So I want to make sure we start turning that tide, and I think this commission's committed to doing that. So, all right, with that, we're going to adjourn this meeting. We may start the next meeting just a few minutes late to give everybody a chance to clear out. So.